Hi, I'm Sarah and today I'm going to show you how to make the large rose using the FMM large rose petal cutters. The first thing we'll need to do for making the rose is to make a cone to go in the centre. You can buy polystyrene ones, but do bear in mind if you use these, the roses on your cake won't be edible, so I always prefer to make mine out of Flowerpaste. For the large rose, your cone will need to measure approximately 1 inch, or if you prefer to weigh your ingredients to get an exact size, it needs to be about 12 grams. Okay, so just take your flour paste and soften it, and then what you need to do is just roll it into a ball. If your flour paste does get a little bit sticky, you can just use some corn flour and that will help with the moisture. So roll it in your hand, and then as it gets into a circle, just hold your hand at an angle and press down to form that cone shape. And then once you've started there, you can just sharpen that end until it's the shape that you like. And remember, this cone is going to be completely covered by your petals at the end. So you could even use the colour that you're going to use for your petals, but I had some white handy, so that's what I'm making mine out of. Now once you've made this, your cone will need to be set aside to dry for around 24 hours to make sure that when you start wrapping your petals around it, it doesn't lose its shape. Okay, so just pop that one to one side, and then we're ready to start making our first row of petals. Okay, so for the centre of my rose, I'm going to use a pink. It's quite a deep colour at the moment because what I want to do is start with darker colours in the centre and slowly lighten the petals as we come round and out to the very outer petals. So if I use a bit of corn flour on the board just to stop the paste from sticking, and then we're going to roll this paste out really thin, almost until we can see through it when we hold it up. So we really are looking for paper thin, and there are a couple of reasons. Obviously, real roses, their petals are very thin and delicate, and secondly, when you're attaching your rose to the cake, you don't want it really heavy, and because this is such a large rose with so many petals on it, it really will get heavy quite quickly if the petals aren't rolled out thin enough. So we're going to keep on going. Lots of elbow grease, but it will be worth it in the end. So keep rolling out that paste. Because we're rolling so thin, this is going to dry out really quickly. But to save time, I want to cut as many petals out of this sheet as I can in one go. So cling film is your friend, and we're going to just cut out our petals and cover them with cling film in 1 second. Okay, we are ready. Okay, so just lift it up to make sure that it hasn't stuck. Okay, and we're going to start with the smallest size from our large rose petal set. And I'm going to cut one for the very centre, and then I'm going to cut 2 for the next layer, and then a further 3 which will form the next layer. Okay, so we can get rid of that piece for now and pop that back into a sealed bag, and then just move these over. I'm going to get my piece of cling film and cover them up. Okay, now this is our very first petal, and it's going to completely cover up our cone that's in the centre. But first we have to soften the edges so that it doesn't have such a blunt look. So with your ball tool, half on the pad and half on the petal, just rub round. You don't want to frill it out too much. It's the centre petal, so most of it is going to be covered anyway. Okay, so when you feel that you've softened those edges enough, we'll take our cone, which is dried for 24 hours, remember, and we're just going to fix that with a little bit of edible glue. Don't need a huge amount, just at the edges should be absolutely fine. And then what we're going to do is bring this petal probably a third of the way above the cone, and we are going to completely wrap it around so that the inside is completely hidden. Okay, we might need a tiny bit more glue just to make sure that that's going to stick. Okay, and there, you can't see the inside of that white cone at all, which is what we want. Okay, so we take our next two petals, which are going to form the next layer, and we're going to do the same as we did with the first petal. With our ball tool, we're just going to soften those edges to make them look a bit more realistic. And the next one. Just like that. Okay, and then we're going to fix those on here with some more edible glue. Okay, so we're going to start at where the first petal's join comes round, and we're just going to cup this one in the opposite direction, and make sure that they're at about the same height when you do this. Okay, and then we're just going to wrap it round. Just going to move that up a tiny bit. Wrap it around like that, so both sides meet on the opposite side. And then we'll take the other one and we'll go in the opposite direction. So where these two join, I'm going to put that one there, and then just wrap them around to meet on the other side. And then you can just adjust them slightly. You don't want it to look too uniform because we are trying to make a rose, and every rose is completely different. There we go, so that's our second row or layer of petals. I'm just going to put a tiny bit more glue. You do only want to go about halfway up with the glue on these. You don't want the petals to be stuck to each other all the way up to the top. You want them to look as though they are starting to slightly open. Okay, so the next row of petals is still in the deep pink, still the smallest of the three cutter size, and we're just going to soften those again with the ball tool. Don't worry too much if your edges are a little rough when you're at this stage, because what you can do is once your rose is put together and dry, you can always take away any of the rough edges by gently rubbing with an emery board, just to smooth it out. Okay, right, so they're ready to go. So we'll get our rose centre, and slightly different to the way we did the second layer. This time we're going to start with the first petal, holding it roughly at the same height again. So hold down the left hand side of your petal and then take the next petal, and we're going to just pop it inside this free edge here, and then we're going to stick it down and wrap this one around, and then tuck the next petal inside the second one and wrap that round also. We're just going to gently curl those edges over. So our rose looks as if it's starting to open out. Our next layer of petals is the 3 that we cut out before, and I've softened the edges just like we did with the second layer. This layer is slightly different. As we get further out and the petals get larger, they open up more. So what we want to do is just curl these petals back slightly so it looks as if the rose is opening up. So to do this, I use a cocktail stick, and curling over the right hand side of your first petal, just tuck it round and under like that. And the same with the next one, always on the right hand side, just tuck that round and under. Okay, and then on the third petal we're going to roll both sides, so round this side with the right and then the left. Like that. Okay, so we're going to fix these on. And this time we start at a join. So we'll just hold the left hand side of our petal down and hold it in place. And where we've got this free side, we're going to take the petal with the 2 sides curled round, and we're just going to slot that inside the open part of the petal, and then wrap this one round. And then we're going to just tuck this third petal in, bring that round. And then once you've got those petals in place, you can just move them around slightly until you've got the shape that you want. Okay, just a bit more glue on that one. Okay. There we go. So we've got the first 3 layers of our petals on there now, and what we'll need to do at this stage is put this on a soft foam pad to dry for up to 24 hours. Depending on the humidity, you may be able to leave it for less, it may dry out quicker. But to be on the safe side, leave it for 24 hours because we don't want these petals to lose their shape as we start adding more layers on. Okay, once we have let our third layer of petals dry for 24 hours, we're ready to put the next layer on. This is going to consist of 5 petals, and for these 5 petals we're going to use the middle size from the large petal cutter set. I've also added a tiny bit of white to the pink that we were using for the central ones, just to start lightening the colour as we're working out to the outer petals. So I've rolled this out just like before. I'm going to cut out 5. And the last one. Okay, just going to cover those up with the cling film to stop it drying out, and pop the rest away in a seal bag. Okay, and then we're just going to soften the edges exactly like we did with the last layer. And the last one, just gently round. Remember, half on the pad, half on the petal, just so it brings those edges down and softens them. Okay, then as with the last layer that we did, we're going to curl these petals under. So just the right hand side, and the same for this one, and the third one. Just give them a bit of movement so they don't look the same or start to flatten. Just use your finger to gently lift those. And with the flower paste, it does start to harden quite quickly, so it will retain the shape that you give it at this stage. Okay, and for the last 2 petals, we're going to curl under both sides. And then when we come to fix them to the rose, we'll want to alternate them. So one with 1 curled under, followed by 2, then 1, then 2, then 1 again. Okay, so we'll take our rose that's been drying for 24 hours. And our edible glue. Just a small amount. Don't need so much. It's rolled so thin, it doesn't take much to hold it to the rose. So we're going to start with one that's just folded under one side, and just like before, if you go to a join, we're just going to hold that left hand side down and tuck these petals, one that's done 2 sides, and just tuck that in. And you want these ones to be slightly higher than the last row because they're going to start opening out. So just tuck that one in again. Like that. Hold the left hand side where the glue is down with the right hand side open. Tuck the next one in. Okay. And then the final one. just hold it down and play around with the shape of the petals until they form the shape that you want. Just add a bit more glue on that one there. Hold it down. Okay. Tuck that under. And then again, now that we've got these 5 petals on, we're going to put this to one side and allow it to dry for another 24 hours. So now that we've added our layer of 5 petals and allowed it to dry for 24 hours, we can get on to our next layer, which will consist of 7 petals, using the medium size cutter again, but this time we're going to lighten the paste quite significantly, so there is a big contrast between the central petals and our outer 2 layers. So this is the colour that I started with initially, and then a very slight difference in lightness for the layer with the 5 petals, and then this is the colour that we'll use for our final 2 layers. Okay, so I've already rolled and cut our 7 petals, and I've softened and curled over the edges for these ones, so we just need to do these remaining 3, and these will have both of their edges curled under, just all the way around, half on and half off of your petal. Okay, and the final one. Okay, and we'll just roll those edges over. So one side and next. One, 2. Just remembering that it doesn't matter if they don't all look the same. They're petals. Real flowers, petals are all completely different if you look at them. So just go with shapes that you like and will think will work for your roses. Okay, so we put a small amount of glue just down the left hand side, about halfway up. Final. And just like before, we'll start at a join point, just holding down our left hand side and tucking in each petal. So we started with one with the right hand side curled down, so we'll go with 2 sides for the next one, just fixing those together like that, holding them in place as you go. The more petals you work with on each layer, the trickier it does get to hold them in place while the petals are still soft. But with just a little bit of practice, it does become easier. Okay, so just hold those in place, and then put our next one with 2 sides folded down in there. Just making sure that there's enough room as we get to the end for our final petals. Might need to just tuck them in a little bit more as you go round, as you add the final petals on. And then add that one in, and then just pinch the bottom of all of your petals so that they start to hold. And at this stage you can still move them around and adjust them. Okay, If you need to add a bit more glue, you can do, and just play with the shape of those petals now, because once it's dry you will be stuck with the shape that they are. So I'm just going to tuck this one in because it's a little bit higher than the rest. So we can just pull that off, tuck it down there. There we go. Okay. And then you have your shape and your penultimate layer of petals. And for drying this one, it will need 24 hours again. Because we've let this dry so that it's hard, I find that drying them upside down on one of these foam pads helps. These petals aren't going to go anywhere, but these ones won't drop down as they dry. So just turn it upside down, pinching the petals at the bottom. Just pop it on. If you need to add a little bit more glue, if the petals aren't holding quite right, and just pop a bit in there. There we go. And just leave that to dry for another 24 hours, and then we're ready to do our final layer. Our layer with 7 petals is now dry, which means that we can go on to our final layer of petals, which consists of 9. These are going to be cut from the largest of our 3 cutters, and they're going to be in the same colour as the layer with the 7 petals. So our lightest pink is what we're going to use for this final layer. I've already cut some out here and I've softened the edges already. So now we need to fold them back. So just curling those under to give the petals a nice movement. This is going to give a lovely openness to our final layer of large petals. So we want 5 of our 9 just to have the right hand side of the petal curled under. One more. And then these final 4 will have both sides curled under so that they join in the middle. Like that, and then the final one. And now we're ready to fix them to our rose. So we want a small amount of edible glue again. Just down one side initially, and if we need to add more later we can do. Okay, and now as the rose is starting to get bigger, it's a little more awkward to handle, so this might take a bit of time to get all 9 petals on. And because they are bigger petals, we need to tuck each petal in further. So we'll hold the very edge down and we'll get our second petal and we'll tuck it over halfway inside the first one. And just bring that in, move it round and hold it further round. Then tuck your next petal again about 2/3 inside the second one, and then just hold that down in place, and then the next one tucked right down inside this, and just keep going round, alternating petals with one side curl down and two. Just tucking that one in, and rotating the rose in your hand as you go. If they start falling away where it hasn't stuck, you can always sort that out once you've got all your petals on. Just tuck that one in. This one right inside that one. Okay, and then our very final petal. Right there. Okay, so you've got your basic shape. At this stage I turn it upside down to ensure that all of my petals are stuck around the base, and then I can turn the rose over and start to play with the shape a little bit. Just fold them round, curl them under again if they've started to flatten out. Okay, and there you have your large rose, and again, because these central ones are dry, we can turn this over onto our foam pad. Just make sure that none of the outer petals are touching the foam, because you don't want them to start bending back. You want them to look as if the rose is opening out, and you want them to stay up so that they don't all flatten, the petals don't all flatten onto each other. So then we'll leave that one again to dry for around 24 hours. Our rose has been left to dry for 24 hours and is now completely dry, which means that we can now add a little bit of extra colour to it using some petal dust. This just brings the petals to life, adds a bit more depth to the colour, makes it a bit more interesting and individual. So just using a little bit of colour, just add in the centre to give a bit of shading. And to the very edges of your petals. Maybe easier with a slightly bigger brush than the one that I'm using at the moment. Very gently, you don't want too much colour on there. Very delicate. And I'm working over my foam pad at the moment because your rose is delicate, and after all the work you've put into it, it would be a shame to drop it and break it at this stage. So just work over the foam pad, just in case. Okay. And there we go, we have our finished large rose using the large rose petal cutter set. Found it helpful, and we look forward to seeing the roses that you make.